Gene flow is the movement of alleles from one population to another, which may often be random for fitness, and when it is, tends to equalize frequencies among populations. When an individual leaves one population, joins another, and breeds, gene flow is occurring. Organisms emigrate or immigrate to a new population, but it's the movement of their alleles that is called gene flow. As an evolutionary process, gene flow usually has one outcome. It equalizes allele frequencies between the source population and the recipient population. When alleles move from one population to another, the populations tend to become more alike, as shown at time 2. To capture this point, biologists say that gene flow homogenizes allele frequencies among populations. The presence or absence of gene flow has implications for the conservation of threatened and endangered species. Studies have documented the decline of gene flow between wild populations that have been isolated from one another, for example, by habitat fragmentation. Many studies have also documented the effects of gene flow between wild populations and captive populations. For example, the captive breeding of fish is increasing around the world as wild populations are being depleted. In some cases, wild fish are used to start captive populations, which are then kept isolated in farms until they go to market, except when they escape. Captive bred fish are purposefully released into the wild in an effort to supplement the size of wild populations. Biologists investigate the effects of gene flow between captive bred populations and wild populations. A team of biologists recently studied steelhead trout in the Hood River of Oregon. Some of the trout in the Hood River are wild, while others were raised in a hatchery and released to supplement the diminishing wild population. Researchers caught, sampled, and released all of the steelhead trout in the Hood River each year for 3 years. Extracting sampled DNA, they calculated genotypes to determine whether parents of each fish were wild or captive bred. They compared the reproductive fitness, the number of surviving adult offspring of the trout in 3 groups: individuals with 2 wild parents, individuals with 1 wild parent and 1 captive bred parent, individuals with 2 captive bred parents. This graph shows the fitness results for female steelhead trout. Individuals with 1 or 2 captive bred parents are assigned a value from 0 to 1, relative to the fitness of trout with 2 wild parents. Individuals with 1 captive bred parent have 16% lower fitness than wild trout on average, while individuals with 2 captive bred parents have 38% lower fitness than wild bred trout on average. The researchers observed similar results for males. So, gene flow is from the captive bred to the wild population and is causing a reduction in fitness in that population. Research in Ireland demonstrated that farmed salmon produce smaller eggs, spawn at different times, and have different predator avoidance behaviors than wild salmon. When farmed salmon were introduced into wild populations, the reproductive success of the wild population decreased. Gene flow between captive bred and wild populations reduces fitness in the wild populations. So, efforts to augment wild populations with captive bred fish may ultimately result in a decline in population size, contrary to the intentions of fisheries biologists. It is not true, though, that gene flow always reduces fitness in the receiving population. If a population has lost alleles due to genetic drift, then the arrival of new alleles via gene flow should increase genetic diversity. If increased genetic diversity results in better resistance to infections by bacteria or viruses or other parasites, gene flow would increase the average fitness of individuals. This was the result when gene flow was used to aid an endangered population of the Florida panther. Gene flow is random with respect to fitness. This is not to say it is happening randomly, but simply that the arrival or departure of alleles can increase or decrease average fitness. And in every case, movement of alleles between populations tends to reduce their genetic differences. This latter generalization is particularly important to our own species right now. Large numbers of people from Africa, The Middle East, Mexico, Central America, and Asia are immigrating to the countries of the European Union and the United States. So, with individuals from different cultural and ethnic groups intermarrying and having offspring, allele frequencies are becoming more similar across human populations.